That's a serious beard you got going on. I mean, you're heading toward Doug Dynasty, but well-groomed. That's a good look. If I ever did that, that's the look I would go for.
The other guy is a guy who takes no prisoners when it comes to sports.
Let's stomp these dudes.
Together, they bring you the best in Oklahoma State sports talk and opinions on sports from around the country.
That's right. Listen up. Hey, listen up. You.
It's Jason Elmquist.
Today, I'm a mild-mannered reporter for the newspaper.
And Patrick Wheeler.
I'm a very dangerous man.
This is the Afternoon Sports Drive on the Triple Play Sports Radio Network.
That's what I'm talking about. Sport.
You ain't never heard nothing like this. Let me work. Show me where the mic is. I'm on stage, black shirt and my Timbs. You know how I do it. I ain't playing with you. I've been grinding. Anybody trying to sleep on me, better do something with your eyelids. I hear a lot of whining, but I don't hear a lot of rhyming. Whoa. Everybody got opinions. Let it go into my ear, then I block that. Put me on stage, I'ma rock that. Saying you the best. Stop that, phony. I am not that. Yeah. What are y'all doing out here? What are y'all doing out here? Maybe you should spend a little less time with the women on your arms and a little bit more with your career. I ain't saying I'm the best.
Welcome into the Afternoon Sports Drive, Triple Play Sports Radio Network. Patrick Wheeler and Jason Elmquist with you here in hour number 1 on Thursday. Tom Dorado will be coming in hour number 2. Can only imagine what he'll have to say about who knows what. We have a lot to get to before that happens, though. Some new preseason awards and watch lists to get to for Oklahoma State. Mike Holder, OSU AD, joined Robert Allen today on his show, and I think there were a few things pretty important he talked about. We'll probably play some of that interview and discuss it. Big 12 Media Days have been postponed to August, and not really a huge surprise there. We'll talk about a lot more in the National Football League that's going on. A deal was done yesterday. 2 deals were done yesterday, of defensive and offensive big-time money for a couple players there. We'll talk about that. Also, we had a sporting event last night that had fans, and we'll talk about that as well. A lot of fans. But first, the big news and this is probably not a huge surprise for Oklahoma State football, is that Chuba Hubbard has been named the preseason Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. No argument, probably, right, from anybody in that category.
I'm assuming when you have the reigning Offensive Player of the Year, as voted on by coaches, returning, there's a pretty good chance that he would win the media vote as well.
Yeah,
and that's exactly what happened. Chuba Hubbard, the Offensive Player of the Year. I tried to vote, but by the time I got to the link, it was already shut down. But I mean, yeah, he was going to be mine easily. The interesting thing, though, is looking at the list. Ultimately, Oklahoma State has 4 on the first team. I guess all the team offensive and defense. But the interesting thing was, though, only 4 unanimous selections. 2 of them were Oklahoma State players.
Yeah.
And they're exactly the 2 that you would think, Chuba Hubbard and Tylan Wallace.
Yeah, that's, I'm going to bring that point up later when we talk a little bit more and what Mike Holder said about Alabama, because there's so much on just those 2 where you're like, you know what? We've got these guys for 1 more year. And it's like, if we were going to play Alabama, we need to play them when we have them. But at the same time, we already know the downside to possibly playing them. So we'll get to that. Like you said, the 4 players on the all Big 12 preseason team, 3 offensive, not a surprise on the names, Chuba Hubbard, Tylan Wallace, Tevin Jenkins on the offensive line there, and then Colby Harvell-Peel is your defensive player that's going to be named to that preseason all Big 12 team. So, and that's the thing when you think about Oklahoma State football this year, is we try to manage some expectations, but at the same time, with everything going in to all the X factors have thrown into this season, assuming that it takes place, is all of that possibly the right recipe for Oklahoma State to catch teams on an off week? You might have some issues regarding the coronavirus where the occasional player doesn't get to play. I mean, I think chips, if they fall in the right direction for Oklahoma State in a very unique year, could play out in their favor more than they have in a long time. Well,
and looking at the teams, I also wanted to point out the fact that, to me, there was because there's always going to be, whether it's the voting, which we'll find out tomorrow, of where Oklahoma State is predicted by the media to finish in the top 10 within the Big 12. But there's always this disrespect and blah blah blah. I have to say, Eamon Ogbongbemiga not being on the list to me is a snub. Because I get there was 3 linebacker positions. I understand 2 of them because they both finished with more tackles than Eamon did last year, and that was TCU's Garrett Wallow and Texas Tech's Jordan Brooks. But the third linebacker, I'm going to say got on there largely because of brand name. It was Texas's Joseph Osai. If you look at the numbers, they're fairly comparable, but ultimately, Ogbongbemiga had more tackles than the Texas linebacker did in the year ago. They had the exact same amount of sacks. Both had 5. He had 1 more interception than Ogbongbemiga. He had 2. Eamon had 1. But then you also look at tackles for loss. Tackles for loss is a huge stat especially when it comes to Big 12 football. The Texas linebacker had 13.5 tackles for loss, which is impressive. But not as impressive as 15.5 as Eamon Ogbongbemiga had. So looking at the numbers, looking at the numbers, I don't see how if you were to put the stats out there, just look at them, compare them, you'd have to ultimately it would have been Eamon that you would probably choose. But again, I think that name Texas, because we kind of keep in mind this is a media vote, and there's a lot more media people covering Texas and all the Texas schools than there is covering Oklahoma State.
Yeah. I think that probably has a lot to do with it. Also, think about importance to team here. I mean, how important Eamon is to the team alone.
Well, because that's the thing, and I could see probably some Texas player or Texas media people maybe, he didn't even have the most tackles on his team. That was Malcolm Rodriguez. Total tackles, yes. He had the most solo tackles by a wide margin, and again the most and solo tackles over the Texas guy, I believe, as well. But that's the thing is, it was Malcolm Rodriguez had a lot of tackles because he was also involved in a lot of assisted tackles. But Eamon was also your pass rusher, getting to the backfield, stuff like that. Malcolm Rodriguez wasn't that disruptive in that regard. He was more of your kind of sit there in the middle and protect the middle of the field, where you could allow Eamon. Eamon was more disruptive all over the place. So that's to me when you again, and you may say, well, I'm biased. I cover the team. Yeah, I see him more than I do the Texas kid. But when you look at the numbers say it should have been Eamon.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely fair. I would not have been surprised at all to see his name on there, and kind of expected it a little bit. So yeah, we'll get into the rest of those when they come out tomorrow for the team and everything too.
Where do you predict right now? If you were to think, how would you predict that the media would vote?
I'm gonna say they put him at 3. Maybe
I think ultimately
3 or 4, but probably 3.
Yeah, I think they're going to have OU and Texas 1 and 2.
Yeah, definitely.
I think in my vote, I don't think I put Texas that high, and that's something we can discuss if we want while we're talking about the team. Sam Ehlinger being the quarterback, I'm not buying it. I've never been a Sam Ehlinger fan. He is possibly the most overrated quarterback in the Big 12.
I think that's fair. I think it's fair.
Because he's an average passer.
Yeah.
He's a slightly above average running back, a runner. I would, if I were to, from what I've seen from the quarterbacks in the Big 12, I would probably have him 5th in mind. I would take guys like Brock Purdy, Bowman out of Texas Tech. I take Brewer down at Baylor. And for listeners, they know how critical I was of Spencer Sanders at times last year. I'd even take him before Sam Ehlinger.
I like Brewer a lot. I really do. Last year watching Sam Ehlinger, there was a lot of times I wasn't really impressed with the decision making also.
Yeah.
And it seemed like he was flustered too many times.
And we also need to be honest, Sam Ehlinger probably shouldn't be playing right now anyway because he's suffered about 20 concussions.
Yeah, that's true.
Because if OSU fans will remember a couple years ago at the game down there when pretty sure everyone thought that he had just suffered a concussion right before the overtime because he literally threw. It looked like he probably did. And then the next play, he throws the ball to Ron Richards, who's the only guy in the back of the end zone.
Yeah,
it's like guy wasn't all up there during that play.
And there were times during the regular season too where you saw some risky throws like that, and you're like, that wouldn't fly at the next level. So
because that's the thing. The way I think about it is, if I took those 4 quarterbacks that I just mentioned, Brock, Bowman, Brewer, and Sanders, if I put either of those 4 quarterbacks into Texas' offense and into their system, I think it elevates Texas.
Yeah, no,
I'll just put it that way. I think it elevates Texas. So that's why I would say that I would have them before Ellinger. I think Ellinger's benefiting from Texas. You're going to be a top 2 team. You know, if there was a returning OU quarterback, it would have been him no matter what.
Oh, yeah.
But I think you're benefiting from that. But as far as if I were a coach who wanted to start start up a team tomorrow, based on what I've seen, and again, I think the fact that he's technically the senior, he's the veteran in the Big 12, but based on talent and what I've seen capabilities, I would take those 4 quarterbacks before I would take Sam Ellinger.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely fair. You're not going to get an argument from me on that one based off what I saw last year. Let's what we're going to do is we're going to play some of the Mike Holder interview that he did with Robert today, in case anyone didn't get to hear it. It is on the YouTube page, obviously, as well for Triple Play Sports. We're going to play a little bit live real quick here, and then we'll comment on it in our first segment. And I think Jason's hearing it for the first time, too, so we'll see what he has to say. Here's Mike Holder earlier with Robert Allen.
Any part of that changed, or any more observations with regards to that and how Oklahoma State football is moving forward?
Well, I'll pay a compliment to our head football coach. He's backed up everything he said he was going to do, and I think he's met with every single player by now, and I think he'll continue to do that on a daily basis. And I think the summer conditioning going about as well as you could expect. We've had some positive tests, and we've dealt with those according to the procedures we set up. And I feel that we're very, very fortunate to have this task force led by Chad Weiberg and our internal team, Dr. Ivan on our staff, and then Oklahoma Health Sciences in Tulsa and Dr. Casey Schrum and Johnny Stevens over there, all that crew. They've been magnificent. They've come over and staffed up, helped us staff up to do all the testing. We're into surveillance testing now, but it's prepared us to deal with the positive test, which we expected. And I think I've really, really been satisfied with how that's all gone. And under the circumstances, I think this transition into voluntary, and this week it's into mandatory conditioning, and you can also have some interaction with the coaching staff. Everything's trending positively on our campus, and our commitment is we want to play every game in every single sport for 2020-2021. That's our goal. We're not planning on compromising from that, and hopefully, I've got my fingers crossed, we're able to follow through on that commitment. And also, I'll qualify that with saying we'll continue to listen to our task force and the recommendations of our health professionals, and we'll listen to the guidance from the governor's office on down and from all the state and national protocols and experts as to how to deal with the virus. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be around here for a while, and we need to learn to live with it. And we can all do our part, which is put a mask on out of respect for those around you, prepare, socially distance, wash your hands. I think if we all do that, then we can all contribute to getting control, or I guess you're never going to control this, but learn to deal with it better and get back to more a sense of normalcy. I think that's what all of us crave, whether it's in college athletics or just normal life.
Yeah, I'm not the most technologically sound person. I'm still learning, but I do have the TPT phone here, which is where we get texts from the audience. And one of my favorites, who is North DFW, so he's coming to us from down there, says Coach Holder needs to have that stay 4 years talk with Cade Cunningham. That's the kind of stuff I get here all the time, Coach.
I don't know. It's not the craziest idea I've heard in the last 6 months. Who would have thought he was going to honor his commitment and come to Oklahoma State after that after the NCAA handled down that postseason ban?
No, that's true, and that was good news. Just like the other day, and I know you can't talk about commitments, but Oklahoma State got a commitment from a young man in the Houston area, a receiver whose father played at Texas A&M in the NFL, and he's a terrific player. And I thought that was a good turning of the tide, because I think that's going to be the biggest thing. And I had this discussion with a staff member. There are a lot of reasons you want to play football this fall. I mean, we know the financial ramifications, and I love Jamie Pollard's letter to the Iowa State fans, and ironically, those were many of the same things you talked about in the spring that Jamie had in his letter. And then, of course, return closer to normalcy, like you were just talking about. But from an Oklahoma State standpoint, changing the narrative, because the media really, I thought, really attacked what was going on here in the month of June. And getting that commitment the other day helps kind of turn that tide. That was some good news. And I know you can't comment on that, but to see some success in recruiting, because I think that's where a lot of the news in June was going to impact the football program the most, is in that area.
Well, the good news is the media, a lot of people just ignore them. And the only thing that really matters is how your current athletes feel about their experience at Oklahoma State University. And if they're positive about it, that'll resonate with the coaches and the recruits around the country. And at the end of the day, that carries the water when it comes to recruiting.
You were in the Big 12 athletic directors meeting on Tuesday this week, and I know they've since postponed the Big 12 virtual media days. In fact, I just got word this morning Commissioner Bowlesby is going to be on with us Monday. But how would you assess the mood and the discussion from Tuesday with you and your fellow Big 12 athletic directors?
Our intent is to play football and try to play, or we're focused on playing 12 games. And until we're told to do otherwise by the health experts out there, and really are faced with no choice other than to do something different, our focus is on playing 12, getting ready to play 12. Right now we only have 11 on our schedule, so we'll need to figure out who can fill the void left by the decision by the Pac-12 and Oregon State not being able to honor their commitment or obligation to play that September 3rd game in Stillwater. But I'm confident we'll come up with a worthy opponent, and we'll be ready to play 12 games. I know when I went out and watched our football team condition this morning, it looked to me like they were getting ready to play football.
All right, I'm going to cut it off there. That was kind of the most interesting part. Well, there was some more later on we'll talk about, but it's the fact that, hey, look, we are planning on still on those 12 games. We're still looking for an opponent for week 1, so don't think that we're just gonna scrap that game or find somebody. Later on in the interview, Robert mentioned the Alabama situation, and he actually responded back to him and said, do you think that we've, as a university, thought about that yet? And he goes, yeah, I think you have. And he goes, we definitely have.
Yeah.
And said that all the options are on the table when it comes to all of that. So that's something to keep note on. Another one was they got into financials a little bit later, and he said, look, 80 to 85% of the revenue, and also mentioned that something that we all know, but every single sport depends on football playing, and that much comes from football alone. Which was also because people saw that letter we talked about from Iowa State, and they wanted to know too some of the numbers, and that's where it is really across the board. I think for most, especially Power 5 schools, pretty much everywhere else too. So those are the biggest points I took away from it. And one of the things he also said, which I mentioned to you, he later said that in his mind he couldn't really imagine, if it's safe enough to play games, a situation where it wouldn't be safe enough to have fans. Which is kind of interesting as well, right? Because we've heard people go, well, we can have fans with game, or can have fans, we can have games, or opposite, right? So whatever. So
well, and we've actually seen another new university. Brett McMurray tweeted out this afternoon that Illinois announced that their home football games will be limited to 20% capacity, which I looked it up. Ultimately, that's roughly 12,000 people will be allowed in to spread out and everything. So again, that still gives you the opportunity of having it with fans. But it's interesting that we're seeing everything was all 50%, and now this is the first one we're seeing that it's much less than 50%. So that's, again, I keep saying we're trending in the wrong direction. I mean, things can change suddenly. As McMurphy tweeted out as well today, talking about how critical the next 2 weeks are, which is perfect timing for me to go on vacation. But that apparently Mark Emmert told NCAA counsel if decision had to be made right now on the NCAA fall championships, meaning all soccer, cross country, volleyball, and FCS football, that they likely would be canceled.
Good thing we got a couple weeks. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but that's the thing is we need that trend to change.
Yeah, we do. And the thing is, which just to add to that point, what Bob Bowlesby said recently as well was kind of reiterating what Greg Sankey said. We've got these 2 weeks, and we have been advised over and over to wait as long as possible and to constantly reevaluate, which is what they are doing. That's why when you get the people like me that have said, look, I think the Big Ten and the Pac-12 kind of jumped the gun a bit, because if they had waited, if the Big 12 and the SEC waits these last 2 weeks and something does change or we're trending in a different direction and they're able to get it done and keep the money somewhat stable in some areas, not with fans and all that, but everything else, I mean, I think that's important. So the idea that they're still trying to stay patient is the biggest factor, but these 2 weeks will be very important.
But I think on the flip side, it's also, I think we're not going to know who was right or wrong, until basically September 1. But for me, the Big Ten and the Pac-12, it's smart in a sense because right now those areas are trending, pretty hard the wrong way, and it allows you, even if it's just 2 weeks, allows your conference, your individual athletic departments to start game planning. Whether it's just saying, hey, this is how we're going to shape up. If the Pac-12, because again, the Pac-12 and Big Ten could ultimately say we're still going to do 12 games, but it's only going to be conference. Well, you need that extra time. Big 12 doesn't need that extra time because they can't do 12 games.
Right? Yeah. No, they're fine with that.
SEC doesn't need that extra time because as long as hopefully they didn't have any MEAC opponents, which I wouldn't be surprised if they did. But as long as they don't have these smaller conferences that they have all their weak games against cancel, then they don't need to change either.
Just let the SEC and the Big 12 play each other. I'm fine with that. I'd pay money for that. I think a lot of people would. They'd watch it. It's fair argument, right?
I said Alabama from day one, and a lot of people have hopped on the idea.
Let's just do it. I mean, at this point, come on. What are we going to lose? We'll talk a little bit more about that. Also, I think last night's race in Bristol with 20,000 or so fans there, I think that was an important step.
Was it 20? I thought it was 30.
The 30,000 was what they expected. They haven't actually released an official number.
They were going to allow 30.
The estimation was around 20. Could maybe a little bit higher too.
Yeah.
So,
but it was also it's a track that allows that because it literally looks like a football stadium.
Yeah, no, it's your definition of a percentage that you are able to social distance amongst a big area like that.
Because I think it normally fits like 160,000. It's something ridiculous.
Yeah,
when you looked at the photos, you're like, okay, are we sure 20,000 got in there? It's like, okay, yeah. When you realize that they're spread out and how much they could be packed in, yeah.
And the thing to me, I don't think it's being talked about enough. I mean, it happened, and we finally had fans in there, so we're going to talk about it. We're going to see if I've
seen quite a.
Have you had? I haven't seen a lot of. what I've seen is the race, but I haven't really seen a lot of how the crowd was and everything like that.
But I think we also have to keep in mind that a lot of people are. It's NASCAR.
Oh, that's true.
Again, that's not going to tick the needle as an NFL.
Trust me, I've thrown that in there. That's what we're going to get to. That's all still to come in the afternoon sports drive next.
Trying to get in the way, minding my own, got nothing to say about nobody. That's right, nobody. Don't shake my tree, don't rattle my cage. You and me will be on the same page. Got no trouble, don't make no trouble. Yeah, you best let a sleeping dog die, 'cause soon you come to understand why. Between the eyes. Well, let me tell you how it all went down. Funky little joint on the edge of town called a Pines Pub. Oh, Wayne, it had to.
Welcome back. It's the Afternoon Sports Drive on the Triple Play Sports Radio Network. Patrick Wheeler and Jason Elkins with you. Here in hour number 1, Tom Dorado coming up in hour number 2. Last night, we finally saw some more fans in the stands here. Now, NASCAR's been doing this a little bit, but not to this level. The estimation was around 20,000 or so. And the main thing I think is important is that we got through, we got it done. It's proven that it can work, at least from what we've seen. I didn't see any major issues coming up from it. I didn't really see any stories of people, breaking all the social distancing rules and guidelines, whatever was in place there and all that. And you know what? I saw a video the other day too. I lost track of where it took place, but it was high school football, sort of like a showcase or something like that, and there were fans everywhere, social distance. The thing is, when I see some of these videos, and like I saw the pictures of the stands at the NASCAR race last night, it makes me think that, and I know, I completely agree with you that it's NASCAR. We take that as much as we can, but it's not football. But maybe, even if they allow 20,000 people into some of these stadiums, people would comply. I mean, maybe. Now, we've kind of put out there that it would be hard to mandate if they weren't complying. But again, from what I've read and seen, I haven't seen a ton of issue where NASCAR officials and the stadium officials were having to be like, hey, move, don't do this, whatever.
Yeah.
I think also part of it was we're going to get them through. We're going to let them in and just kind of stay a little bit relaxed, watch, but we're not going to go crazy on someone if they're a little close.
And that's, again, the stories I'm seeing, no official numbers yet, but they're estimating around about 20,000. And it typically can hold 140,000. Yeah. So, I mean, when you get enough of the, when you have it that limited and you spread out, and that's the thing is like, that's in that regard, you don't even necessarily need a mask. Like some people may complain, well, there's no mask. Well, if you're just sitting with your family, that you're around all day long, 24/7, and the next closest fan is 2 sections over, you can take your mask off, especially down there where it's nice and toasty right now, kind of like it has been here. But yeah, most of the photos I saw, it looked like, everyone's social distancing. Again, I didn't see a lot of masks, but because of the social distancing, you don't necessarily need to factor in. The mask is more of if you're going to be inside or if you're going to be, around a lot of people that you think that you don't know where they've been, at a grocery store or something like that, then yeah, wear a mask. But if you're outside, it's not really needed. So, I've seen some people complaining about that. It's like, dude, they're probably sitting with family members around no one else.
See, and that's going to be what people will bring up for college football. Like, well, if I'm outside, I got to wear the mask. If I'm sitting here, I'm still going to guess, though, that universities, if they allow some fans in, like Iowa State's still trying to plan on doing, it's probably going to have one. I mean,
I think it's going to depend on what capacity you're at.
Yeah.
If they Illinois, 12,000.
You think they would have to?
I think you might be able to be lenient, and maybe that's why they're setting the bar so low. It's like, okay, we know we're going to have to deal with the mask, people disputing it, and we're not going to be able to uphold that because we don't want to risk, the employees that we have to bring in to say, put your mask on. But we can curb that by saying, okay, there's only going to be 12,000, so there's going to be more space in between everyone, so we don't have to worry about mandating masks.
Yeah, and maybe they can get away with that because what we are seeing is that it is possible to have fans in a big area like that and
outdoors
and social distancing. I think that's the big step forward.
Because that's the thing is like obviously we're all focused on college football because that it's needed for for the entire athletic department. But I think the ones that we're gonna have to really start worrying more so about are going to be the indoor sports, your winter sports, because of the fact that you don't have as large of a venue. It's not easier to just put people outside and make them spread out and not have to worry about masks. Like when you're indoors, it's going to be a little more difficult. So that's everyone's again focusing on football because it's the first thing up. But I think more so it's going to be harder for those winter sports, because I wouldn't be surprised right now if we have football. They try to get it played, maybe even try to do it with fans, and then basketball rolls around and you say either no fans or just even more limited. Maybe 50% for football, but we can only do 10% for basketball, something like that.
And one of the possibilities is, instead too of just an immediate announcement of we can have this many, and say that that's going to be it for the year. I think it's possible to where going through the season, if trends are kind of in the right direction, they say, okay, let's do 10% more. How much more do they push and push the limit a little bit?
Right.
And we get a few more in here.
I think it's going to depend on, and most of these universities know that they're packing people in. Typically, they when you have a 60,000 seater stadium, people are literally elbow to elbow.
Any room only, right? Yeah.
So if okay, we need X amount of space around, we can factor in, okay, now we can get it to this percentage. So I'm assuming they can figure out a good idea of, hey, we can get, if we have, as long as we allow, groups of 5 or 6 are the bulk of your tickets, then you can say, hey, maybe we can do this amount of people. But if it's a whole bunch of individual or 2-ticket people, then maybe you're saying, man, we can only limit it to this amount of people because we're going to start running out of space if we don't want people who aren't living together to be sitting that close together.
That's what the announcement has kind of been, and the guideline has kind of been so far with crowds that have been allowed is, yeah, you can come in, but you got to be with your family. We got to limit that part. You have to be at least 6 feet away. And again, the whole mask thing has kind of been up in the air with some of it. But what I'm telling you, from what I've been a part of and being in the stands once now and seeing it, it's encouraging me a little bit to at least say that, look, this is maybe doable.
Yeah, and while we're talking about this, I'll go ahead and bring up the NCAA has issued their next step of return to sport guidelines. Just announced today. What's the interesting thing is, this is more on the athlete aspect. The big thing is, among the recommendations put forth, daily self-health checks. So probably just your temperature checks, stuff like that, not necessarily an actual swabs and stuff like that. The appropriate use of face coverings and social distancing during training, competition, and outside of athletics. Testing strategies for all athletic activities, including preseason, regular season, and postseason. Testing and results within 72 hours of competition in high contact with sports, which is stuff like football, wrestling, basketball, stuff like that. Soccer would be this fall. Member schools must adhere to public health standards set by their local communities. The biggest one for me, especially when we're talking about football, is appropriate use of face coverings and social distancing during training, competition, and outside of athletics. Well, in all football, you're only allowed a certain portion of the field that you have to stand in between. I think it's the 25s or 30s, I think, something like that. So,
and it's been highly enforced.
Yeah, it's compacted area.
Yeah.
Well, even more so at Oklahoma State, Boone Pickens Stadium, you can't even social distance with the wall behind you. So I don't know this whole social distancing during competition, how that's going to effectively work for football, unless you just say, we're going to spread everyone out along the entire sideline, or maybe you limit how many players are allowed on the sideline, something like that. I mean, that may be, because that's the thing, because I roam the sidelines, take photos at OSU football games, and for home games, I mean, you have anywhere between 10 and 15 athletes who aren't even in uniform. They're wearing uniforms, but they're not in pads and whatnot.
Yeah.
So it's your guys who are redshirting or injured and stuff like that. So I think those guys would have to go. If you're worrying about social distancing, those guys would have to you stay in the locker room, watch from the stands.
Where do you put them? Let them go sit in the stands?
Yeah, those guys would no longer be allowed on the sideline because they're not going to be playing anyway.
Yeah.
So that limits how many people, limits exposure, but also allows the possibility to social distance some more. But maybe you say, because I know you're allowed an X amount of players on the sideline, maybe you say, you know what, okay, you're 2.5 deep are allowed. I mean, that's going to be the interesting thing, is there's not a lot of space to social distance, especially at Boone Pickens Stadium. So this whole recommendation of social distancing during competition is going to be hard for football.
It brings me back to Harbaugh's comments with the Ravens. He said, what the NFL was talking about in their guidelines, like it's humanly impossible is what he called it to follow all those and do football at the same time, which kind of the same way with college football. What would you do with those players? Well, you don't want to put them in the stands because what if they're close to some random person and then they get it for all we know? I mean, it's up to that point. So
unless you're doing like baseball, MLB right now, and you're putting the players in the stands by themselves, and that's where your crowd noise comes from.
Yeah, that has looked really weird from what I've seen. I don't know how they expect to. First of all, when they put these guidelines out, let's be honest. When it comes to training and everything behind closed doors, look, they're going to do what they want. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, unless there's cameras around or whatever, or reporters, for some reason around close enough, they're going to be doing your normal stuff. Now, on the sidelines of football games and all that, again, are you going to get a penalty if you're too close? I mean, is the referee's going to have to enforce these? I mean, seriously, what's that?
Yeah.
So the guidelines, that word itself is like, just a soft little blanket you can throw over everything that can easily be taken off. So,
McMurphy actually reported that they're supposedly going to announce that the Power Fives are working with NCAA to actually essentially have a set of rules of how it, and I don't know if this is what that was because technically it came out about 12:30, and I know that was about shortly after McMurphy's tweet, but McMurphy's tweet also mentioned more details on athletes if they come down with it, or contact tracing, stuff like that, that I didn't see included in that small release from the NCAA, because McMurphy talked about if a player comes down with it, tests positive for it, it's 10 days in quarantine. If contact tracing, it's 14 days in quarantine. And if that's the rules that they ultimately put in place, we're definitely going to see disruptions in football. I mean, just lock it down now. I mean, it's going to happen.
I think it would be a miracle to get through without some sort of disruption for football, that's for sure. When we come back, we have a new record for the highest paid defensive player in the National Football League. Talk about that before Tom gets in at 4 o'clock later on in hour number 2. You won't believe this, but another player has opted for the G League instead of heading into college basketball. All that still to come on the Afternoon Sports Drive next.
It's been a too long time with no peace of mind. I'm ready for the times to get better. I've got to tell you, I've been racking my brain, hoping to find a way out. I've had enough of this continual rain.
It's the Afternoon Sports Drive, Triple Play Sports Radio Network. Patrick Wheeler and Jason Elmquist with you. The NFL has a new highest paid defensive player. Myles Garrett has eclipsed all other defensive players. Chris Jones, as we know, was the first round of big defensive studs to get paid. Myles Garrett, they talked about this historic deal was coming his way, and it did. 5 years with $100 million guaranteed. Look, I got to say this about Myles Garrett. First of all, I think he's a hell of a player. I mean, football player in general. He's fantastic. Has some stuff to work on still, but is very disruptive. And I think there's a lot of guys, when they talk about top defensive linemen in the league, they sometimes leave him off the list where he should be. Now, that being said, I lost a ton of respect for him personally, during the whole issue last year.
Rudolph, yep.
Yeah, the whole Mason Rudolph stuff. It was funny because I got talking to a friend about it yesterday, the whole situation again. And if you remember the whole situation where he rips off his helmet and everything, people initially were like, oh my gosh, Myles Garrett, what was he doing? Well, then you got some people that came out and they said, oh, Mason Rudolph, he started. But I'm telling you, I went back and I've watched this video probably 1,000 times, and people love to forget that Myles Garrett is tearing Mason Rudolph to the ground.
Yep.
Far after the play is over. Mason retaliates first by trying to take his helmet off.
Yep.
So that part is where people are like, oh my gosh, he did it. Well, and then we all know what happened what kind of struck me that I never realized, how viciously it was, not just the helmet hitting him in the head, but him ripping it off, and the way that Mason Rudolph's neck was positioned.
Yeah.
It could have killed the guy,
Yeah.
It's scary. And we all know what happened after that, suspensions and everything else. But then what got me was 2 weeks later, after all this had happened, that Myles Garrett goes, oh, by the way, he called me a racial slur. And then everyone was like, where was this at the initial? And the NFL goes, dude, no, he didn't. We did an investigation. Dude, no, he didn't.
No.
So I lost respect a little bit for Myles Garrett and all of that. I think it, honestly, probably one of the, if not the dirtiest play I've ever seen in football.
Oh, yeah, easily.
But getting the money, I understand, too.
I've seen two interesting, fascinating, funny stats from this.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure on the specific number, but somebody tweeted out that with his new contract, he could actually hit Mason Rudolph in the head like over 4,000 more times, and the fine would still be covered by how much he's making.
4,000 more.
Yeah. Which I thought was hilarious. This was my favorite one, though, because Sam Henderson, again, good friend of the show, the station, is a big Browns fan.
Oh,
and last year it was we're going 16-0, we're going to win the Super Bowl.
I knew a lot of people that said that.
Yeah. So each week after they lost, it was like, so 15-1? Going on. Well, I saw this tweet from Field Yates, and so I had to send it to Sam and with a little jab. And Field Yates put it perfectly. He goes, this is a wild stat. The Browns made a total of 12 first-round picks between 2011 and 2017. Myles Garrett just became the first of those 12 players to sign a second contract with the team.
That's wild. 12 first-round picks.
12 first-round picks. So they went 0 for 11 on first-round picks.
That's hard to do.
In a 6-year window. Yeah.
There's a lot of things I've said in the past for the Cleveland Browns it's hard to do, but that's hard to do.
Yeah. So I jabbed Sam with a Super Bowl caliber front office right there.
See, that's the thing I didn't mention too, was when all that went down with Myles Garrett, it also proved at that time just how incompetent and the lack of leadership was with not just front office but Freddie Kitchens. Oh my gosh, it was just everybody run free and do what you want. When he thought there for a second that why else would he have done it if he didn't think he probably wouldn't have faced repercussions from his head coach?
Yeah.
And it was like, I'm going to rip the helmet off and hit him with it, and Freddie will probably be like, he probably deserved it. I understand why you would do that. I mean,
it's the same reason that we heard Baker Mayfield make the comments of, I'm not going to work out with the quarterback's coach in the offseason. I know what I need to fix. It's like, right.
That was
Peyton Manning, Tom Brady. They know what they don't need. They don't work with those quarterbacks coaches just for the fun of it.
Yeah,
it's like
that was red flag number 1.
Yeah. That's why I will say I'm glad Todd Monken got out of that.
Yeah.
Well, did he? I guess I don't know if he officially.
At least I thought he did. But
right, because we assumed that he would be let go, but I don't know if he actually ever was let go.
You're gonna have to fact check that one. But yeah, that's the thing is I've loved to be one of those guys too in the past that has just ripped the Cleveland Browns, and not just because it's easy to do.
Yeah,
yes,
he did live. I forgot about that.
Okay.
He's now the OC/quarterbacks coach at Georgia.
Yep. Okay.
Which I'm sure goes really well for Oklahoma State fans who really wanted him here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wish I would have been around during the whole Mason Rudolph thing, just to get Oklahoma State fans' response. Right? They were obviously probably like, "Oh my gosh, this dude needs to be arrested," right? With Myles Garrett.
Oh, yeah.
Remember when that was the talk originally was
assault and battery? Yeah.
Mason Rudolph should file charges on this dude.
Yeah.
And people were like, I get it. I mean, I got to say this.
I can understand that because we've actually there's actually a precedent of that in hockey. Where up in Canada, somebody was actually arrested for basically driving a guy's head into the ice in the middle of a hockey NHL match.
And the argument was because at what point does it no longer becomes a threat to a life, right? So if your life is in danger.
Yeah. I think if he would have been paralyzed by it, yes, because that was the thing with the NHL. I believe the guy was actually like seriously injured.
Yeah.
If Mason Rudolph would have, which I mean, technically lights were out for a little bit, but not as much as that other hit. But and that's the thing is like, because if I remember right, this came like a week or two after he had suffered that huge concussion.
It did. It was pretty recent, and yeah. So what I've always thought, and even watching it back, if you watch it at any time, it's like you don't realize how lucky Mason Rudolph was, and Myles Garrett too, that the other part of the helmet wasn't what came down on his head because. Yeah. He could have split it open. I mean, he could have fractured his neck. And if that had happened, then there would be call right for Myles Garrett to be arrested.
And see, this still shows me some dysfunction or uncaring within the Browns because obviously you've seen that that Myles Garrett has a bit of a temper.
Yeah.
and you've basically turned around and said, yeah, we're going to promote it by making you the highest paid player in the NFL.
That's where my other issue comes with, is how much risk was involved in this, okay? Because after I saw that play, I was like, he's clearly not stable. I mean, a person doesn't make that the first reaction.
No.
Like, it wasn't even that bad. Okay, you were the one that tackled a quarterback, which you're going to face retaliation if you're hitting a quarterback after the play. That's going to happen.
And driving, and that's the thing is, like, if you go back and watch the video, the way he drove him to the ground,
on top.
Most defenders this past year would have been flagged just for that.
Yeah, that's illegal.
And they didn't even flag that.
No, you can't do that. And he put all his weight, fell on top of him, drove him into the ground. So for him, first of all, was he like not expecting retaliation for Mason Rudolph the way that he did? But on top of that, I immediately thought this dude is just not right in the head. Because also I didn't want to hear this explanation of, I just blacked out, I don't know what was going on. No, that's not a response from a level-headed person. Okay, we've never seen that before anywhere, really, and especially in the NFL.
We've seen some unstable players in the NFL.
Oh, we have, but
I mean, we even saw, because here's the thing. Do you remember when? Actually, I think it was a Browns player, offensive or defensive lineman, who had a flag thrown and like lost part of his vision.
Hit him in the eye. Yeah.
He kind of like, I think he shoved the official, but you didn't see him like take off his helmet and try to swing it at the guy or like body slam him.
Right. That's what I'm saying. There's been plenty of little interactions or fights or even hitting a quarterback late that hasn't resulted in first of all, quarterback retaliation, but after that hasn't resulted in the offender at the beginning there using a helmet as a weapon. Okay, that's why when I saw this contract, I did think exactly what you just said. Okay, so he literally was a couple inches away from possibly who knows what, doing what to another human being, and he gets rewarded with the highest contract as a defensive player in NFL history. Interesting.
According to Sam Henderson, guaranteed to win a Super Bowl now. he said he guarantees it, which I replied with a gif of, I can't deal with stupidity.
Yeah. Let me guarantee something. This is your guarantee hot take, okay? Give it. Let's say
Browns aren't even if Baker Mayfield were to suddenly play like a Mahomes type of caliber, they still wouldn't be the third or fourth best team in the AFC.
No, Big Ben's back. It's over. Let me tell you this: signs for 5 years. I say within the first 3, he either does something, talking about Myles Garrett here, does something on the field again, or off the field, extremely stupid, that results in him being kicked off the team or the NFL stepping in and suspending. That's my guess within 3 years. It's going to happen.
Potentially, yeah.
So, and again, would we be surprised that would happen to the Browns? No, not at all. It's a Browns thing. Yeah, of course we wouldn't. Hour number 2 is next. Tom Dorado is going to join us. We'll probably bring up a couple of the Mike Holder comments to him, see what he had to say. Also talk about another player has decided to forego college basketball and head straight to the G League. This is happening more and more. And then also later on, before Jason gets going, I'm going to ask him about what he thought about Derrick Henry's contract yesterday, too. A running back got paid. And not to mention this, but we will in a little bit here, not to get too ahead of ourselves, the Redskins, formerly known as them, are now in looks like a ton of trouble. We'll talk about all that still coming hour number 2 of the Afternoon Sports Drive next.
Now I hit the scene, they like lights, camera, action. Living in a dream, now my music, they be blasting. Step out, I'm a star, always in the latest fashion. Had to set the bar, tried to catch me lacking. Bank account for my son, he won't have to struggle. You can see it in my eyes, all I do is hustle. They tried to knock me off my feet, I'm ready to rumble. Feel like I ain't ate in weeks, working off the muscle. Oh yeah, oh my, we ride for my brothers, no lie.
And welcome back into the Afternoon Sports Drive. Triple Play Sports Radio Network, hour number 2. Patrick Wheeler, Jason Elmquist, Tom Dorado's in studio now as well. When Tom comes in here, I'm going to send him a couple of the things that Mike Holder said earlier today, which was with on Robert Allen's show, which I thought were pretty interesting. Tommy D.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for stopping by. Here's what Mike Holder had to say today. Did you hear him on Robert's show?
You know, I did, as a matter of fact.
Okay, never mind. So you're good.
Yeah, I did.
The first thing I thought when I played some of the interview in the first hour, I thought that it was interesting that he talked about, first of all, we're playing on still 12 games. We're planning on, and something he said was he couldn't imagine a situation where it was safe enough to play games but not have fans in the stands.
I heard it.
Yeah. Yep. What do you think of that one?
Well, I thought the overall approach was consistent with what Holder's been like throughout the beginning. And you got to keep in mind, he's the overall head coach, so he's trying to send out positive vibes to his team, right? His players.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm using an analogy here, but and he has been positive from the get-go on this thing. From we don't have any other plans, but to plan on 12 games and starting on time and having the stadium filled, and that's it. And I applaud him for that, because just looking at it from the ticket viewpoint, okay, let's just say he was more, I don't know, fellas, we might not, and all of a sudden your fan base says, our coach is saying, I don't know. So then I'm going to say, I don't know if I'm going to buy him.
Yeah.
Well, it's a matter of economics, okay? Yeah. And I'm not saying that's the only reason Holder came across the way he did, because I think deep down inside he feels like we're going to do what we're going to do, and we're going to get it under control here, and we're going to get the best we can, whether it's 10 people or 10,000 or 100,000, and we're going to sell the tickets, and we're going to play 12 games. And I truly believe he believes that. So I didn't find out anything in his, 10, 12, 13 minutes that I didn't know. I mean, he's been consistent from the get-go.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't like anything, groundbreaking or anything like that, but he did mention the, up to 85% of the revenue coming straight from the football program, which I still think there's probably that person every single time they hear that number, like, whoa, really? Okay, and their eyes are open.
Well, if people don't know that by now.
Yeah, well, that there's some that are just like, I didn't really know that.
They've heard that about as much as wash your hands.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing, Tom. I mean, do you think that through all this, because that's the thing I think we need to start thinking long term is, are there going to be changes, not just here at Oklahoma State, but within the college sports landscape, to where you don't rely on one entity or one athletic sport to sustain an entire athletic department? I mean, do you think that this pandemic is possibly going to lead to a change in how you try to budget and stuff like that?
Maybe on the budget end, but I can't imagine how the dynamics wouldn't change. The big breadwinner is going to be football every year,
right?
Because of all the revenue streams that come in. I've said this a million times, but there are only several revenue streams for an athletic department. It's ticket sale, it's donations, it's the cut from the conference, which you have to lump TV appearances in. Right. And that's it. I mean, you can't have bake sales. I mean, you can't go out and have a car wash. I guess you could, but there's only so many ways that you can make money as a department.
And that's why I think they need to start maybe creating or thinking, because that's the thing is, like, we've as a society we've gotten comfortable with things. Like maybe we need to start expanding, because one of the things I thought up, because we seen it this week, it's not going to appeal to your generation, Tom, but esports. ESPN, Big 12 and ESPN Plus have tag teamed this week to do a Madden challenge between students at university, not even athletes, just regular students, who signed up to want to play, and broadcast that. And I caught some of it on, I think it was Tuesday night. And, like, again, for someone who plays video games, I thought it was really cool because they even incorporated the broadcasters. I know when OSU's had theirs, Dave Hunziker broadcasted one of the games. Like, incorporating stuff like that might be something that can help you, because that's the thing. With esports right now, most of the kids are going to have their own consoles or computers or stuff like that. So you're not having to pay for the most important aspect of these games. You're not, and you can possibly create a new revenue stream there. And I know over the past year and a half to 2 years, some universities have started creating esports teams. And I think OSU is even looking at it as early as last spring, possibly, because I know there's at least one university in the state that actually has one, but that might be something that you can see becoming a part of the athletic department, because it could create a large new revenue stream, but not cost you that much in the front end.
Well, I'm sure in light of all the things that have gone on, people much wiser than I sit there and come up with these possibilities of raising money or having revenue, and I have no idea how much that would be, but $5 is better than no dollars. So whatever they brought in, that might be worth it. Now, you always have to offset whatever it is you're doing. If there's a cost involved, if it's going to cost me $5 and I make $5, then it's not a good deal.
Right.
So that's always a consideration.
Which is my argument on why you might not have fans in the stands, not necessarily because of health reasons, but if you're being told that you're only going to be allowed to have 45% in the stands. Do you think that the ticket sales are going to cover the cost of having the stadium turned on, of having all the concessions, all this other stuff, the cleanup crew, all that stuff? So I think that has to be a factor as well when we're looking at because again, Illinois is saying only 20%, and theirs. So you'd assume that would cover the costs of having employees that are there to man the gates, man concessions, all that stuff.
I can't imagine a 20% of a big crowd would get you a profit. It may keep you from losing money. And I'm not smart enough to figure out how a school comes up with a percentage like that. And I think there are reasons you could say, remember Iowa State was going to have 100%, and now they're not going to have that. So I don't know that the schools are in control of that, quite frankly. I think the virus is in control of it. The numbers are in control of it. The local municipalities, the state municipalities are in control of that. And you just can't go out there and in the face of big numbers, let's say it continues on, and say, well, we're putting 40% in anyway. I mean, that's not going to work. But could there be fans? I guess so, yeah. And it does cost you money to open the door. I mean, it costs to run a business, and that's what this is. College football and college athletics is a business, so you do have to offset that a little bit. Again, if it's going to cost you $6 to put a football game on, and you can only recoup $4, and you do that 7 times a year, now you start to look at a budget and go, man, I don't know about that. But I think if you can have the games, that's the main thing, because the money you're going to get, even though ESPN, CBS, Fox, even though they probably, I don't know, I say this, I don't know that. I was going to say they probably couldn't charge as much advertising-wise, but, maybe they can go to an advertiser and say, we got the only show in town, so if you want to watch Oklahoma State,
I think they will. I think they will, because I think the ratings will be higher than they have been maybe ever for college football.
So you can get money coming back the other way. That's why
but
this is going to work. I mean, and the PR value here, and I'm glad I'm not in this anymore, but the PR value that you're going to have to fight the rest of the way is somebody's going to try to equate it with it's money versus health. It's which is, now, are they all that greedy? Everybody's greedy. They want the money, and they're going to put the people who are making that money in at risk. Now, I don't believe that, but I can tell you that's where it's going to go in some areas.
That's why I think you saw the Iowa AD. His statement was pretty cut clear when he said, look, it's honestly, to answer your question there, it's kind of in the middle. It's health and safety and all that and money. It's kind of in the middle.
It's popular to say that, though. It's easier to mask what you're saying in football is 85% of what we have here.
Right, exactly.
That sounds a little softer than going out and saying, you know what? We're going to have football. Everybody, and I don't think there's any question we're going to have football.
Yeah.
Now, how it'll look, when it starts and all that, only because you're going to have, just like the pros, they're going to put a product on the field, on the court, because they know they're going to get some TV revenue.
I'm going to disagree with you on the TV revenue thing, though, because ESPN's been hemorrhaging right now as well. And just because they're able to ask for more money from, possibly from ad people if we have sports this fall, doesn't mean they're instantly going to turn around and say, yeah, we'll shove some of it towards the universities. Like, no, I could see them arguing, we have a contract. You're only going to get this amount of money because we got to cover the costs because you guys didn't have spring sports that we were expecting all this revenue coming in from.
There's some give and take, but at the same time, there's still the basics, the nuts and bolts of a contract. And it's not the product that they signed a contract to broadcast 3 years ago or 2 years ago with everybody in the stands going crazy and all the build-up and all the interviews. No, it's not the same product. However, you both signed it. Now, there's going to be some give and take. I'm sure the conferences, the TV outlets are going to go and say, look, we're not just going to not pay you, but we haven't been able to recoup this, and this, so maybe we come down on the money a little bit. Now, it's up to the conference. The conference could say, no, you signed this thing, you're in on it. But generally, my dealings with the network people is that you're both looking at the greater good for each other, and you want to have games on so you can have advertisers, and then the conference wants games on so they can get a revenue back. Now, will it be the exact number? I don't know. There may be some give and take, but I don't think anybody's coming off on that contract. You both signed it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a clause in there, an act of God, whatever,
maybe,
act of God clause.
Well, and if you're saying within that contract that you're taking a percentage of the ad revenue, then maybe, you could see an uptick. But if it's just a base, you're going to get paid X amount of dollars for a game on.
The schools don't. The ad revenue has nothing to do with the schools. That's how ESPN, CBS, Fox get their money, by selling those spots within a game broadcast.
That's what I'm saying, though, Tom. Is if with the contract between ESPN and Big 12, if it says that you're going to get a percentage of the ad revenue that we get in, then yes, it's going to increase. I think it's more of a you're going to get a flat dollar if it's on ABC, if it's on ESPN. Yeah. So that's why I don't think ESPN necessarily has to come out and say, well, we'll give you a little bit more because we're getting more from our ad people.
They weren't going to give you any more.
Well, that's what you said.
No, I said they're going to charge, hopefully, their advertisers enough to recoup the money they don't have.
Right, but that's not going to help it's not going to help OSU that ESPN's charging more for ad revenue.
I didn't say that. OSU's ad revenue has nothing to do with Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's going to get their money on a share from the conference, whether ESPN sells it or not.
Right.
If they don't sell any of them.
Right, but it's not necessarily going to see an improvement if ESPN. That's what you made it sound like ESPN's going to get more money, so thus it could be a trickle down.
No, I said ESPN could get more money when they sell to advertisers with this pitch.
Yeah.
Look,
I think they will.
If you want to watch the games, you got to watch us.
Yeah,
so if you're going to watch us,
that's not going to affect any university.
But it doesn't affect how much the contract is with the conference. That's not going to make any difference. It could in future years, but it won't this year.
I think the smart thing is when the contract comes up here in, I think, a year or two, is you might see a change of we're going to base it off of a percentage of that revenue.
And I'm guessing, like I said,
from the conference side,
there'll be some give and take because most contracts have an act of God, something in there that
pandemic clause.
Yeah, and this, whether the legal beagles would look at this as an act of God or whatever, but there's a clause in there that if it's beyond our control, we can't give you a product like we said 5 years ago, and we can't pay you as much. There's a give and take there. But the fact is, the contract was signed by two parties, and ESPN, Fox, CBS, they are responsible for that contract. Now, how they get their money is not the Big 12's problem. Right. It's their problem.
But again, that's all dependent on there being a product, though.
Oh, yeah, no sports. Product, no pay.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Tom, let me flow you the NCAA's new step of their next step of their guidelines with all this to everybody. The appropriate use of face coverings and social distancing during training, competition, and outside of athletics. Also, testing and results have to be in within 72 hours of competition of high-contact sports. So you test Wednesday, you have to have the results coming in by Saturday.
I think that let's work from the back. Yeah. I think that's got to be the case.
So where should we put should we start putting bets down on which school loses their quarterback or something on a Saturday morning?
I think the next question, which they did not address, and it's not up to the NCAA to address it, I guess they could, will you have to declare on Wednesday who turned up positive? Or did we just let everybody figure out when Spencer Sanders doesn't trot out there on Saturday and is standing over there in the sideline that maybe he had it? Now, I go both ways on this thing. We don't have an injury report procedure in college athletics, not like the NFL. We have to declare who's in, who's out, who's probable, all that stuff. I'll be interested in seeing how the NCAA and or conferences approach this, because it affects you too.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if they just came out and all they had to say was illness, right? Like they've done before.
Illness could be, you don't have to say, and really to protect the person, you don't have to say it was Patrick Wheeler.
Yeah.
So you could say within the framework of the rule, well, we had 6 positive. And we'll have 6 players who won't be playing Saturday. Now, I think everybody could hide behind the HIPAA thing, and so it's not. We don't have to say who it is. But then you start getting into. I've been in this business long enough. You know, if your opponent wants to find out who the 6 are, now you start weaseling around behind the scenes, you know, to find out who it is, and you might do the same thing if you were the next opponent you're playing didn't have 5 guys. You try to figure out who it might be and what you might have heard and who's up there in that particular town and what they heard, and look at websites and look at chat boards and all that stuff. And it would be hard, basically, when school is in session, unless your players are sitting in everybody's taking all the classes in one big room in the West End,
or all online. Yeah.
You know, and not in a classroom with anybody, which I don't know that every course would be that way. I mean, there's got to be some you got to be in class.
I'm curious. I would guess that the coaches and the academic side as well would be trying to shape it up to where their athletes are, if possible, taking as many courses that aren't going to rely on in person. I think that would be the smart thing to do for any university.
Should be.
Yeah, is right now under the, because I mean, again, you know, you and I have heard OSU football players talk about, well, all my classes are online anyway, so. But you know, there's some that you're probably going to be like, okay, with your major, maybe you take this next. You know, technically you're supposed to take it as a junior. Maybe you see if you can take it in the senior, your fall of your senior year when you can do it in person. That just to protect you and the team. So I bet you're seeing a lot of that conversation going on right now too.
Well, and again, you want to minimize your quarterback sitting next to a regular student.
Right.
From Montana, who you don't know what happened during the summer and all that. So you can regulate, I guess. You can bubble it, I suppose, in that regard, and not lose anything. And that's a good point.
It reminds me of the what Paul Feinbaum brought up when he said, well, what if coaches just don't disclose this information? Well, is that possible? Well, he said, will we see a coach that your star quarterback gets coronavirus, and he's like, tell anybody.
Well, I don't think unless this is my opinion, and I wouldn't unless I'm forced to tell you, which I can't imagine I would be forced to release an individual's name publicly with coronavirus.
No, I'm saying like he puts him out there and lets him play.
Oh.
And doesn't say anything.
Now, you know, I'm sure there's got to be some checks and balances, right? I mean, if you're going to have somebody
you would hope in theory.
Check the list of everybody was tested.
I think you're taking a serious risk if you're
ask Lamont Evans if there's checks and balances.
Yeah, and especially now.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe 5 years from now it won't. But
that would be a risk.
Things are going to change, and I was just telling you before we went on the air, not that this affects I guess in a way it affects the public, but there won't be near as many reporters covering the games at home.
Or photographers on the
on sideline.
Photographers, videographers, all that stuff. Yeah.
You're not going to have weekly. Let's get together at Gate 4 things. These are going to be pretty much Zoom interviews.
Yeah.
Post game's going to be Zoom. So, you know, now you get into the point where I used to work for managing editor who all he needed was an excuse for me not to come up here. But if you're going to do it by Zoom and you're going to cover the game, well, just sit in your living room. There's no reason for you to come up here.
Yep.
You can do it from your living room and just.
Oh, that's I mean, in the current state of, even before the pandemic, that's something that journalism has been trending towards anyway. Because over the past couple of years, there's been a few instances where they're like, well, Jason, you don't need to go to this game. You can just Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh and West Virginia. The last 2 West Virginia games, I haven't traveled. They haven't sent me because it's like, well, you can just watch it on TV, and you know we can run AP stories or this, that, or photos, and you can just write a story from here. I mean, I think. As long as, and that's the thing is like, AP provides enough photos, I think a lot of of journalism models are going to start trending that way. Of why do we need to send someone, even with men's basketball for OSU.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're seeing it even from the Tulsa World and Oklahoman, the amount of games that they go on the road for has dwindled drastically. Where I remember people telling me when I first got here that the Stillwater News Press would be sending Ron Holt would go to every single men's game on the road.
Yeah, he did.
Back in the Eddie Sutton years.
Mm-hmm.
With the Stillwater News Press, the only road games we go to is if it's in the state. So OU and Tulsa and stuff like that.
Well, you guys had a pretty good situation because radio and TV were together over there with the News Press, and Leon Matthews was in the radio side. He was a pilot, and blah, 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 and they flew. But the social distancing in that press box is going to thin out a good many media members.
Yeah.
There's not going to be a lot of people in the press box anymore that covers every three times a year.
Right.
And not that they're not important, but for every person who sits there and is allowed to sit there, that's the cleanup part. I mean, you got to disinfect. So everybody who's in that press box creates a disinfecting situation.
Oh, yeah.
So there are going to be a hell of a lot less people in that press box this year. And I hate to use the essentials, but that's it. I mean, you're going to – I'm not – working in that department, but I could foresee if the Oklahoman said 4 people, they might get away with 2. But you know what? They might have to send 1 because all the interviews will not be done in person, so to speak. They'll be done.
So what you're saying is the news press was already setting a trend by only being able to send one up to the press box while I was down taking photos, by also writing a story. See, that's what the Oklahoma and Tulsa World need to do.
The Jason Elmquist rule, maybe.
Well, what you've seen, the trend is going to be businesses everywhere during all this have realized, 1, they don't need people to travel as much as they thought. 2, work can actually be done in a lot shorter amount of time also than people thought too with a lot of businesses. So we're going to see changes.
Newspapers in general will if I have to, I need somebody in my mind to write the game story. I need somebody to be there to do that. But if I'm running the show from Oak City or Tulsa, just using that as an example, if my columnist can't go down on the field and can't be in the locker room and walk up and talk to Spencer Sanders while he's sweating 5 minutes after the game,
right?
And I have to wait. I have to get on the Zoom call. Then I might as well be on the Zoom call in the office.
Or if my guy a guy or girl who's supposed to be writing up just a notebook from the game, why do they need to be there? Because they can just. Again,
those things are going to change.
That's something that the news press has already been kind of trending toward, and some of these others might be forced to if the university is saying, "Hey, we're limiting." But I think you're not just for the big papers. You might see some of the small papers that have gotten the opportunity to come up for games. Maybe they're like, "Hey, we can't fill it now because we just don't have the space."
I'm not in any position to be. I'm just giving you a generic approach.
This is something
this is something that Sean McGuire, Gavin Lang, Clint Worth, this is something these guys will dictate. I'm not giving you a play-by-play. I'm giving you a generic look. It's going to be a lot less populous in that press box.
Because again, that's been a question I've asked since I think May. I even asked Harold Kuntz up at Kansas City. That's one of the interesting things that the fans may not think about, but as a media person, I'm wondering how many people are going to be allowed in the press box, how many people are going to be allowed on the sideline to take photos, to do videos, stuff like that.
I heard your sideline story, and again, I'm not giving you policy, I'm just giving you an opinion here, but that sideline is about as tight as you can find anywhere.
Exactly.
And social distancing on a just give me your players distance from each other and your coaches distance would be a chore.
Yeah.
So I would anticipate that there'd be a reduction in actual cameras on the field, and perhaps they won't be where you used to be, and perhaps you won't be roaming. Perhaps you would just be stuck in one area.
Oh, and it may be also a case where, if there's no fans, then obviously you probably don't need the cheerleaders there either, but because they're taking up essentially half of the sideline as well.
Yeah. That's going to do it. Jason's heading out. Appreciate it. See you tomorrow.
Trying to get a good start on the first game or what?
No, puppy class. Our trainers actually.
Who's training?
Yeah.
The puppy training you?
No, we're training the puppy. Our trainer's actually going to be moving to Texas here next week, and we're needing to finalize. So we have to get one in today before our usual one on Sunday. So
why don't you just go to Texas with the puppy then?
Really? You want me to go right into the hot spot of COVID-19 right now?
It's important for the puppy to be trained. It's important.
At least they have mask mandate down there now.
Yeah, they do.
All right, Tom, when we come back, another athlete, basketball, has decided to not go to college. He's going to the G League.
And I got a little update on Yornay.
Ooh, some more Yornay news.
How in the world did he end up at SMU? Well, I'm going to tell you when we come back, it's a small world.
There you go. We'll be back next.
Summer, you can see it fading fast. So you grab a piece of something that you think is gonna last. Well, you wouldn't even know a diamond if you held it in your hand. The things you think are precious, I can't understand. Are you reeling in the years? Stowing away the time? Are you gathering up the tears? Have you had enough of mine? Are you reeling in the years?
Welcome back. It's the afternoon Sports Drive, Triple Play Sports Radio Network.
We're just sitting here listening to Steely Dan. We're listening to the whole song.
Having a good old time, listening and enjoying. Here's the thing. Before we get to your Yornay stuff.
Okay.
The NCAA President Mark Emmert. Okay. Here's the I don't like this statement, but it's the one he made today. Quote, today, sadly, the data points in the wrong direction. If there is to be college sports in the fall, we need to get a much better handle on the pandemic. End quote. Now, does that mean that, if right now that were the case, and would we not have college sports if it were to start right now, or would it be delayed? I don't like hearing that from the president as a whole. Now, I understand that we've got these issues and their cases are rising and all this too, but the thing that I've said, and people have reiterated this point, is look at everything that's about to start, okay? We're about to have sports all over the place.
Right.
Can't we also have college football? Now, I know the response has been, well, it's not just college football. We got a bunch of other sports, bunch of other athletes and all this, but come on.
Mm-hmm.
Can we have college football? Or is that impossible?
Well, on the surface, I'd say, yeah. And we've discussed this 1,000 times.
Oh, yeah.
To the point where it's sickening.
It is. It is.
But, yeah, I mean, the student athletes in football are probably, in most places, in a better place medically than they would be if they were home.
Yeah, I agree.
So you're dealing with not a perfect blend of athletes, because there are positives, and there are positives within your staff, within your administrative staff. So it's not been a clean bill of health anywhere, Oklahoma State included. However, just looking at it from that perspective, I mean, if we had to play today, is Oklahoma State clean enough to go play? I mean, obviously it's an exaggeration because they haven't worked out enough. But let's just say they had, okay, and tomorrow is the first game, and everybody was ready to go. There's no question in my mind you could find two teams that felt good about where they were medically. But we found out it's not that easy to sit there and make that determination, because, again, you are at the, I don't want to say mercy, because that's a negative kind of, you're under the guidelines, you're under the guidance of local municipalities, statewide municipalities, not to mention the federal government municipality, and not to mention the overall NCAA municipality. There are a lot of people who have to weigh in on the overall advantage of playing.
Look, what's going to drive me nuts is...
Well, it is mad.
Well, what is going to drive me even more crazy than it already is if they ultimately go, no football, okay, worst case scenario, and you've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of perfectly healthy athletes sitting there like, okay, now what? That's what's going to drive me nuts. It's like that it is possible to do. Let's go to the phone lines during the afternoon sports drive. Go ahead.
Yeah, in terms of the NCAA and this data studies, they're not. I don't know what data they're looking at. If you look at the one graph from the CDC that shows deaths from this virus, it's almost peaked out to nothing across the country. That's the most important data that shows that we're reaching herd immunity, and this thing's going to be gone by Labor Day.
Yeah,
it's unbelievably frustrating that they're acting like this thing is on the rise, and it's. The most important data point is the deaths. That just shows that there's less people getting it and dying. And right now, like in New York City, their herd immunity right now is at 65%. That's why they don't have anybody getting sick anymore. Nobody's going to the hospital. Nobody's dying in New York because they've reached immunity. It's just, what's the NCAA looking at?
Well, that's a point that I've tried to make at times too. Was regarding deaths of all this, yeah, we're still in the right spot. Now we've seen a little blip up, but I think that had to do with July 4th. I think it had to do with a lot of people protesting, all that stuff too. But yeah, still where we are. And for instance, I think it was yesterday or maybe it was Tuesday, we saw the lowest number of deaths we've seen on that certain day. And so that's the thing is, when you look at this from that's what I've told Tom before too, is, if we were seeing people just all over just dropping dead from this thing, that'd be one thing where it's like, okay, we can't do anything. But when we've got guys that are in college football, okay, players that have got it, and are fastly recovering and are recovering at a rate where, first of all, a lot of them getting it are asymptomatic and all that too. That's where I'm like, when we talk about if we're going to cite the coronavirus with all this stuff, let's also look into how really it's going to affect those that would be in the prime spot to get it. Would be guys that will never know.
Right, but the thing is the CDC and the World Health Organization have both come out and say the asymptomatic people that are testing positive can't transmit it. They're saying now that only people that have symptoms are transmitting it. So this stuff about quarantining athletes that test positive and they have no symptoms is nuts.
Well, and that's why we're seeing, I think, the Big 12 and the SEC wisely saying, we've got 2 more weeks here to really make a decision, and we've been advised this whole time to wait until the very last moment that we can to make big decisions because of that.
And the scientists are showing now that they think 50 to 70% of the world population can't get the bug because they have such great immune systems, and the fact that it's a coronavirus, and there's been a ton of different coronaviruses in the past that people have had, and they think there's a cross-reactivity to antibodies with that. It's just nuts that the NCAA is going to throw away a football season on this bad data, that they're not even looking at the scientific studies.
Now, this is Doc, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hey, Doc, I haven't talked to you in a long time. Good to hear your voice. I think the frustrating part about this entire thing is, and I'm not zooming in on CDC or anything like that, but you can get a different version of this entire operation, so to speak, if you just go 1 hour to the next. And some of these guys say one thing one day and say something the next. Now, under the guise of, well, things change. What I told you yesterday was true, but today it's not that way, so I'm telling you something different this day. And I think that in our society, I'm making a generalization, but we're so finite in our society. If I do this, then this happens. If I don't do this, this doesn't happen. There's a final score. We get to the end of the game. This is such a frustrating thing to try to explain. But I will say this. I mean, I don't think there's any conspiracy theory that the NCAA is coming up with facts and figures to scuttle a football season, because they understand how important it is for them to have the football season from coast to coast. So I don't think they're throwing this out, Doc, just to get individuals in every state pissed off because they don't understand it or don't want to understand it. I think they're just making the best case effort, if you will. And this is coming from somebody who doesn't know anything about this. What I read is what I read, and that's all I know. And you've been in the business long enough to know you can make numbers be what you want them to be either way.
Yeah. But yeah, here's another thing. I think if you put truth serum and the people in charge of the NCAA trying to make this decision, I think they're scared of lawyers. I think
could be.
Completely agree.
Could be.
Somebody got sick and died.
Yep.
They set up. They're worried about lawsuits. I think that's their biggest fear right now.
Yeah.
But outside of that legal conundrum, I mean, common sense would tell you that there's no reason they don't want to have a football season. I don't.
Right.
I couldn't come up with a real conspiracy. Well, Mark Emmert, he's just anti. They want to have sports. That's what they do. They're part. Oklahoma State's part of the NCAA. Maybe there is a legal reservation, perhaps, and you bring up a good point. But I don't think they're coming out with these numbers, Doc, just to individually piss off a host or a caller and saying, well, there's no reason we can't play football. In their minds, there's a reason, whether it's the Pac-12, whether it's the Big Ten. In their minds, there's a reason they're not going to play non-conference games, and it's not just to go piss off the fan base.
Yeah. Well, as long as they have the conference, I'd be happy. But they canceled the whole season. That's just.
I don't think that's. I mean, I would be stunned if that happened.
Yeah.
Just stunned.
Yeah. All right. Well, you guys take care.
Thanks,
Thank
Doc.
you.
See you.
Yeah, that if they were to cancel the entire season, I think there's been plenty of voices in college football, including ADs, presidents, whatever, that have been like, that would literally shock everybody.
I mean, I just can't see that happen.
Yeah, and I agree with what he said, and that's I've said it before too. It's part of it is an optics thing. You know, I think that the Big Ten, and I'll stand by this still, in the Pac-12, I think they jumped the gun. I've said that, and I think they did. And a part of that, I believe, was they want to look good in a lot of people's eyes. Now, I understand, but at the same time, when it comes to the money aspect, well, they are actually going to save some money, aren't they, by not having to pay $1 million plus dollars some of these teams
coming in.
Yeah, so
but keep in mind, that's one side of the coin. But the other side of the coin is if they paid $1 million to these teams coming in, they would make 10 times that much by opening up their stadium. So in effect, if they don't have the game, yes, they're saving $1 million, but they're also losing $9 million by not having a game. So it's costing them by not having a game.
Yeah.
More than you think, because they count on those openings to bring him in a lot of money.
The thing that gets me is we've talked about, the worst case scenario, okay? A college football player comes down with the coronavirus and dies from it, okay? That's worst case scenario.
Yeah.
That would shut down everything, right?
I would think, yes.
But we always see the reports of, people dying from football-related activities before, right? Or a guy gets the flu and dies, or gets pneumonia and dies during a football season. I mean, it's that type of thing. It's like, so where do we compare? That's kind of where I am on all this.
I don't know. I don't know if I could use that same analogy. I think we're in a whole different frame of mind with this thing, because it has killed so many people nationally. And one thing I was going to bring up to Doc too is, and I get guilty of this. Now, if you're the family of that, say we have one death in Oklahoma, that's one too many.
No, look, I agree.
We look at the death column every night when that comes out, but you got to remember, the one that's just about as important is the hospitalization number, which in the state of Oklahoma has gone literally from about 200 to 600 some odd in the space of 3 weeks. And hospitals cannot handle, you saw it in New York. Now, they've gotten better.
A lot of that was self-induced in New York.
Well,
okay, let's be honest. Tom, let's
self-induced in terms of how?
In terms of bringing patients that had tested positive back into nursing homes. Okay.
Well, that wasn't smart, but I mean, the ones that had to go into the hospitals, when you got people in the hallways,
they used a third of the beds they thought they were going to have.
Well, and they set up a lot. Yeah, they never used. Correct.
So what I'm saying is, there's been people that have been like, one death is too many. Look, I totally agree. I don't want people to die.
And there's the optics that we have again. Are we going to play football and just forget about everything else? We got to play this damn game, and it's the way it's going to be, and come hell or high water, we're playing, and I don't care about the health situation. I don't care if people get sick. I don't care if people die. I don't think college athletics is there. They're not going to do that. And the optics, whether we believe them or not, that will be somebody's argument. Oh, you're putting the dollar figure the dollar signs over vital signs. I remember when that first came out.
I think a part of that is why the Big Ten did what they did. I really
Perhaps.
do. The
There were optics, maybe.
I think it plays into it.
Yes.
We got to hit our break, actually. When we come back, you're going to give us more update on your URNA stuff, right? You got some more news on that?
Yeah, we got a call. You want to stay on with us? You want to...
Yeah, we'll try to get to him in just a minute because we're over our break. And we'll come back just in just a minute and get back to hopefully a caller and what Tom's got on URNA. That's next. Sports Drive, wrapping it up. Patrick Wheeler and Tom Dorado. Really quickly here, okay? So I want to get your URNA stuff out there. One of the callers that we had to put on hold there, his question was, how likely of a scenario would it be for us to kind of talk about here? Would we see where students were not on campus and we still had sports? Because, yeah, he was right. Like he told me, Mark Emmert had originally said that. Didn't see a scenario where if there was no students on campus, we're just not going to have sports.
Didn't Bowlesby say that as well?
Well, Bowlesby had said that he had kind of talked about that, but then I remember specifically he kind of even stopped at what he was saying and did a little turnaround and was like, if we did have students on campus or not on campus and we still had classes going on, just not traditionally, we could probably still find a way to have sports.
I think the initial rationale for that comment, and we're going way back now, we know a lot more since those comments came out, was that if it's unsafe for the student body, it's unsafe for your student athlete.
Right.
I think that was the premise initially. I think we found out that the student athletes have a bit more advantage, if you will, over what the student body will have from a medical perspective and watching over them and treatment and testing and all that. Now, again, I'm not privy to what the university is going to do testing-wise, but I can't imagine they're going to test 20,000 students 3 times a week.
Look, I'll say it this way because we've heard from pretty much everywhere. There's been some examples of not doing this, but pretty much everywhere where we're planning on have students on campus. Like we're planning on having that to happen is the majority of schools and universities. Now, what I would suggest is if we're going to have this issue where 20,000 students come back to Stillwater, everything's open. Now, I know there's masks in place and all that, but still, if we have a little outbreak or something, are we going to see universities that deal with this around the country that just freak out like, oh my gosh, you couldn't have seen this coming, and they have to send kids off campus? If that's going to be the case, I think it makes almost as much sense to call it off now like some universities have and say, let's just go all online. But the problem with that is, for universities, which we've brought up with what Harvard is doing, for example, they're doing all online and still charging full tuition. So, and I could see that being the case for, I don't know what Oklahoma State would do. Maybe they do the same thing if they went all online, but they still charge full tuition. Well, if that's the case, you're going to have students that aren't going to sit in front of a computer and pay full tuition for that, okay, for a full semester. So, but it almost makes as much sense if it means keeping the college football season intact in the eyes of these people. Some people won't like it, but to have basically your student athletes on campus, right, compared to everybody else. So you can almost bubble them in a way. Now, you probably can't control necessarily where they go in their own time, but you can at least try to keep them in one central location for a period of time that you have. So maybe it makes as much sense just to put that out there to some schools instead of, and why I'm saying that is because, like I just said, what if when students come back, you get these little outbreaks, and you know what the response would be from universities? Well, we just got to stop. We can't. And they're like, maybe they go, we probably should have done that in the first place, right?
Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be a what if. I think common sense
I don't either. I think,
common sense would tell you there's going to be an uptick.
I'm expecting it.
Now, how the university handles that, I'm sure they've got plans in place.
Right.
And I don't know what the magic number would be.
Yeah.
How many infections would necessitate shutting it down. Obviously, there's concern in that for schools like in Oklahoma State that you're going to go right up to Thanksgiving break and that's it, and then you don't come back till in the first of the year.
Which that makes sense
because
to me.
The premise again is we don't want to deal with this again if you go home for 4, 5, 6 weeks and we don't know what happens. I don't know that the two are. I know when it came out, it sounded good. I guess it sounded like. We don't have students. We couldn't. If it's not safe for students, it's not safe for student athletes. But I don't know if they're connected anymore.
No.
Could we have football without the students in place here in Stillwater? Yeah, we could.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think if it were all online, to answer it pretty quickly, bottom line, I think you could still have football. Real quick, what you got on yours?
Well, it's I don't know if this was really connected anyway, but it's a little bit of a small world irony thing. You know that yours committed to go to SMU. Well, the head coach down there is Tim Jankovich, and Jank has been a head coach at Illinois State. He's a K-State guy, and was an assistant coach here for a number of years. Just a good guy. And, of course, Mike Hatch, who is their recruiting coordinator, was an assistant coach here as well. Now, I don't know that played any role one way or the other in because these guys were here long before was thinking about going to school anywhere.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we know it's a small world with telephones and AAU and all that. I know Hatch had some AAU contacts, and because Victor Williams was close to So, I mean, you could put 2 and 2 together and probably come up with 4 and not 5 or 6. So it's a small enough world where if you start looking at some of the familiarity, I guess, if you will, and I don't know and I have no idea if you had a relationship with Jankovich. If he recruited him, he could have, for all I know. I don't know if they knew each other one way or the other, but it is kind of, it's kind of, I guess, amusing to some extent. You got an OSU faction there at SMU, and he's leaving OSU to go there. So.
Well, you could probably guess this too. I wonder how early on in all this situation that SMU was quickly in the year of with the sanctions being handed down, but also with maybe even before that. Like, hey, with what's happening.
If it was before that would be tampering.
Well,
so
I know, before we know, but I mean, it could have been there.
Could have been a player call them.
Or just saying, like, look what's going to happen next year with.
Well, I think was. This wasn't something that I think in his mind it was kind of planned a little bit long before. Now, the staff here was not. They weren't privy to it till it happened, and I think they was stunned when it happened. But long story short, I'm not saying, but we know phone calls and players know this, So it is a little. It's not a coincidence probably that he ended up with some Oklahoma State guys. That he left Oklahoma State guys and went there. But again, he might have had a relationship with Jankovich in the recruiting process long before this. So that could be possibly the case.
That's Tom Dorado. I'm Patrick Wheeler. Jason Elmquist was with us, and thank him for coming on always.
He's puppy training.
He's puppy training. Hopefully that's going well.
You know what? I've heard a million excuses why Elmquist has not been here over the years, but that might be the one right there.
Oh, man, that's too good. This has been the Afternoon Sports Drive, Triple Play Sports Radio Network. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back same place, same time tomorrow to wrap up the week. Thanks, Tommy D. Appreciate it as always. I'm Patrick Wheeler.